Montana in winter was a merciless land, where the cold didn't just cling to the skin, but sank deep into the bone. Snow fell thick, a white curtain swallowing the roads, blotting out the sky, leaving the world hushed and blind. In a small log house, Naomi Carter sat close to the fire, hands wrapped around a cracked porcelain cup, listening to the wind whistle through the seams of the door. Naomi was a young widow, barely past 20, living alone on the patch of land her husband left after a mining accident. As a black woman in Montana, she bore every whisper behind her back. What was the point of holding on to the land? How long before she was forced to sell? How could a woman fight nature and the harshness of the frontier forever? Still, Naomi held fast, like a slender tree rooted in the storm. That night, with snow pounding harder than ever, she caught a sound beyond the wind. At first she thought it was only the storm's trickery, noise bent by the gale. Then, in a pause between gusts, came a faint whinny, followed by the heavy collapse of something into the snow. Naomi's heart tightened. She threw on a thick cloak, pulled a scarf around her head, and pushed the door open. The cold struck like knives, the wind lashing her face raw. Each step into the drift was a battle, but she pressed forward, drawn by that sound, as if by an unseen rope. Near the stable, she found a dark shape against the snow. Closer still, she saw it was a man, nearly buried, arms slack, his breath so shallow it vanished in the storm. His horse stood beside him, trembling, hooves stamping, steam huffing from its nostrils into the frozen air. Naomi knelt, brushed snow from his shoulders and face. His skin was pale, lips turned blue, lashes rimmed with frost. She thought him gone, until his eyes cracked open, a thin line of gray fighting through the ice. In that dim light, there was still a spark, a will refusing to surrender. That look stopped her cold, heart pounding. In the howl of the storm, something in his eyes told her he hadn't let go. She laid her hand against his cheek, her warmth against his frozen skin. Her fingers shook, whether from the cold or some unnamed stir inside her. She heaved his arm over her shoulder, dragging him upright. His body hung heavy, stiff as stone. Each step through the drifts was a test of will, but Naomi did not stop. Gasping, gripping hard, she pulled him across the threshold. The door slammed shut behind them, but the chill of his body still seemed to seep through the room. By the fire, she pulled off his soaked gloves. His fingers were stiff, purpled by the frost. She cupped them in her own, rubbing hard to bring life back. Her small, work-rough hands pressed against his lifeless ones, dark against pale. A strange, striking contrast, as if she alone held the last thread of his life. His eyes flickered once more, gray and dim yet burning faint. His lips moved, broken words rasping, like he meant to say, "Don't leave me." Naomi leaned close, her curls brushing his face, her breath warm against his frozen skin. She stoked the fire high, the flames leaping across his hollowed features. Wrapping him in a wool blanket, she pressed both hands to his chest. His heartbeat was faint, but there. It thudded weak yet stubborn, and her eyes blurred, whether from the smoke or a surge of feeling she could not name. Naomi did not know who he was, where he'd come from, or what had thrown him into the storm. But that night, with her hand resting on his chest and his heart still beating, she knew she had pulled one life back from death's reach. He slipped into unconsciousness. Naomi sat beside him, keeping vigil. The fire threw their shadows long against the cabin wall, one broad, one slight. And in her eyes those shadows were no longer alone. In a white and endless winter, two strangers had become each other's shelter, though their story had only just begun. Dawn broke, though the sun could not pierce the heavy sky. A dim light crept into Naomi Carter's cabin, falling across the pale face of the man beneath the wool blanket. The fire had burned low through the night, leaving the room scented with pine smoke. Naomi dozed in a wooden chair beside the bed. Sleep had barely touched her. All night she listened for the stranger's ragged breath. At times she started awake at the sound of a groan or a hand trembling without command. She feared that if she left too long, he might never open his eyes again. A cough dragged her from her haze. She lifted her head, startled, to find the man stirring, struggling to sit, though his body trembled with weakness. She rose quickly, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. "Don't try. You're still too weak." He blinked against the light, lids heavy, until gray eyes showed through, rare, shadowed by fatigue yet holding something she could not read. "Where am I?" His voice rasped, each word tearing from a throat gone dry. Naomi poured water, slipped an arm behind his neck, and lifted him to drink. His skin burned hot beneath her hand. The cup touched his lips, and he drank slow, like a man starved of water in a desert. "You're in my home," she said, her voice steady, though her eyes never left his face. "I found you by the stable. You'd have frozen out there." The man nodded faintly, gaze drifting over the plain room. Walls darkened by smoke, a rough-hewn table, shelves near empty, patched curtains at the window. No sign of family, only the mark of solitude. Naomi folded her arms, standing tall. Questions pressed in on her mind, but only one found voice. "Who are you?" The pause stretched. His eyes held hers, weighing truth against silence. At last he said, quiet and even, "Silas, Silas Gray." The name hung in the air, simple, unfamiliar. Naomi frowned. She knew most who lived within miles, yet had never heard it before. Few men wandered Montana's storms alone. Seeing her doubt, Silas lowered his gaze. "I was traveling. The storm caught me. My horse gave out. Without you, I'd be dead." Naomi stayed silent, suspicions still alive. What kind of man rode into a blizzard? Yet the way he spoke that last line, earnest, unguarded, unraveled some part of her wariness. She fetched a clean cloth, dipped it in warm water, and returned to the bed. Silas flinched slightly when her hand touched his forehead. Her dark, work-worn skin stood sharp against his pallor. His fever still burned, sweat gathering at his temple. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither breathed. Naomi felt her pulse quicken. Silas, though weak, studied her face as if to set it deep within him. No word passed, but the silence carried its own weight. Naomi was first to look away. She wrung the cloth, wiped his brow, her touch careful but taut with unease. Each brush of her fingers sent an unfamiliar shiver through her, one she fought to dismiss as nothing more than tending the sick. When the task was done, she drew back, steadying her breath. "You need rest. The fever hasn't broken. Don't waste your strength." Silas pressed his lips together, but nodded. Before sleep took him, he whispered words that caught her still. "Thank you for not leaving me." Naomi turned aside, hiding the flicker in her chest. She was used to cold stares in town, to whispers and contempt that followed her steps. Yet a simple thanks, from a stranger half dead, felt like a spark in the longest winter. That day she cared for him as best she could, changed the cloth, cooled his brow, set a pot of corn soup simmering until it was soft enough for him to swallow. Each time she passed, she caught his eyes half open, following her not with suspicion, but with a quiet need, as though holding on to her presence to keep from slipping away. Still, Naomi's guard did not fall. The name Silas Gray was too thin a thread to trust, but already, woven into her suspicion, something else pressed close, the knowledge that his presence had broken the silence of her cabin. A silence she had grown used to, and now could no longer ignore. That night, as the wind howled and snow lashed the door, Naomi sat by the fire, eyes on the rise and fall of his chest. A thought came unbidden, that his arrival might bring trouble. Yet another followed, sharp and unsettling. Perhaps when her hand touched his fevered brow that morning, something had begun she would not be able to stop. In the days that followed, Silas Gray slowly regained his strength. The fever broke, and the ashen cast faded from his face. Yet his gray eyes still lingered on every detail around him, carrying a weight that spoke of a story he wasn't ready to tell. Naomi did not press. She knew each soul bore its own wounds, often deeper than those the body carried. Her focus stayed on keeping the house and land alive through the bitter season. One morning as she hauled a bucket from the well, the rope slipped in her frost-numbed hands. The weight nearly toppled her, water spilling over the rim. Before she fell against the ice, a strong hand caught her arm, pulling her back. She looked up into Silas's eyes. He was close enough that his breath, tinged with wood smoke, mingled with her own. For a moment, neither spoke. His grip held longer than it needed to, until she tugged gently and he let go. The warmth of his touch lingered like a burn on her skin. "Be more careful," Silas said, voice low and rough. Naomi nodded, turning away, though her heartbeat raced faster than before. In the days that came, Silas began to share her work. He mended a broken fence, split firewood, cleared the snow piled high before the stable. Once, when Naomi carried water from the well, he reached for the bucket. Their hands brushed, the briefest touch, but enough for her to glance up and find his eyes fixed quietly on her. The silence between them carried more than words could, but the outside world was not so quiet. When Naomi brought butter and milk into town to trade for salt and flour, eyes turned on her at once. In the general store, the woman behind the counter pursed her lips, glancing sidelong. A cowboy leaned against the wall, grinning, whistling low, before saying loud enough for all to hear, "Looks like Widow Carter found herself a way to keep warm this winter." Laughter spread, sharp as thorns. Naomi stiffened, face still, setting her goods on the counter. But the stares clung to her, barbed and unyielding. She was used to prejudice, her skin, her widowhood, but this cut deeper. Now they weren't only scorning her, they were inventing a tale to stain her very existence. On the ride home, the wind stung her cheeks, yet it was the words that seared more than the cold. She had always believed she was strong enough to endure, but there were wounds harsher than snow or barren soil, wounds inflicted by people. When she led her horse into the stable, Silas was stacking wood near the porch. He caught the heaviness in her eyes and stepped closer. "What happened?" he asked. Naomi shook her head, unwilling. Silas stood, waiting in silence, until at last she sighed. "They spoke. Things not worth repeating." The porch creaked in the wind. Silas said nothing more. He only set his hand on her shoulder, warm even through her cloak. Naomi felt the trembling in her chest ease, surprised at the steadiness in that simple gesture. Yet the whispers in town grew louder. People muttered that Naomi Carter had let a strange man into her home. Some called it a disgrace. Some said she was scheming to bind a man to keep her land. Naomi heard it all and answered none. She returned to her work, while Silas stayed, at once a burden and a solace she had not expected. One evening, as Naomi gathered wood, a thin sheet of ice gave way under her. She slipped, the bucket tumbling aside. Before she could hit the ground, Silas's arms caught her, pulling her against him. Her body struck his chest, and she breathed in the sharp scent of pine and sweat. Naomi lifted her head too quickly, finding herself far too close. Their breath mingled. Silas's eyes lingered on her sun-browned face, her dark gaze. Heat rose to her cheeks as she pulled back, hurriedly rising to her feet. "You should mind your own work," she stammered. Silas didn't answer. His gray eyes only softened, watching her as though he'd glimpsed a part of her she tried to keep hidden. For Naomi, trust had always been a costly thing. Yet with each unspoken glance, each touch longer than necessity, some quiet exchange was taking place. Between the scorn of the town and the doubts of her own heart, Naomi began to realize she was letting a stranger step through a door she had long kept closed. Outside, the storm raged as if to swallow the valley whole. The wind screamed through the cracks, driving snow against the cabin walls like 1,000 tiny blades. Inside Naomi's small house, the fire blazed red, pine logs snapping and hissing, their resin filling the air with a sharp scent. The golden light cast their shadows high across the smoke-stained walls. Naomi sat on the bench near the stove, wrapped in a heavy quilt. Darkness cloaked the room, broken only by the restless dance of the flames, their glow catching her dark eyes until they seemed like embers themselves. Silas sat across from her, tall frame hunched in the cramped space, his presence filling the silence. All evening, she heard only the storm beyond and the wood cracking within. Yet this silence did not press down on her. It carried, strangely, a sense of safety. It had been a long time since a man's presence shared her home. Silas, mysterious as he remained, had unsettled the emptiness that winter after winter had encircled her. Silas was the first to speak, his voice low and rough, mingling with the fire's crackle. "Strange thing. I thought I'd grown used to being alone. But these days, staying here, I remembered people aren't truly made to live that way." Naomi turned toward him, firelight painting his face. It bore the lines of time and wind, the hardness of years, yet for a breath there was something fragile in the confession. "How long have you lived alone?" she asked, her voice no louder than the storm's pause. Silas dropped his gaze to the floorboards, fingers clasped together. "Long enough that no one remembers me anymore. I once had a home. Lost it all. Years back." He said no more, but Naomi felt the weight settle in his words. Silence stretched, broken only by the howl of wind outside. She gave a small nod, her eyes dim with her own memories. "I lost, too. My husband. An accident in the mine. When they brought me the news, I thought my life was over. Folks told me to leave, head east. But I stayed. I wouldn't let them see me break." The words startled her, spoken before she could stop them. She rarely laid her grief bare. Yet tonight, in the glow of fire, before a man she barely knew, the truth slipped free, as if it had waited too long inside her. Silas lifted his head. His gray eyes met hers, and in that moment, silence became a bridge instead of a gulf. Naomi pulled the quilt tighter, but when Silas shifted nearer to avoid the draft sneaking through the doorframe, his shoulder brushed hers. The touch was slight, yet his warmth made her heartbeat stumble. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known," Silas murmured, not in praise but as if he had simply seen the truth. Naomi turned her face away, cheeks burning, not from the fire. She gripped the edge of the quilt, willing her composure to hold, though her eyes betrayed her, darting back to his only to flee again. Time slipped by in the hush. They sat close, breathing the same warm air, smoke curling in the rafters. Naomi heard the rhythm of her heart, the slow pull of his breath. When a log fell and flames flared high, she caught him watching her. His gaze did not press, did not demand. It held only steadiness, as though he needed to be sure she was real and not some dream of the storm. Naomi shifted, and her shoulder rested fully against his. A tremor, hot and sharp, coursed through her. She drew in a breath, steadying herself. Silas did not move away. He left the choice to her, whether the closeness would stay. Naomi did not pull back. On that night of storm and fire, two souls marked by loss found a rare accord. No vows spoken, no promises made, only a hearth, a cabin, and the nearness of one another. That night, Naomi knew with certainty. From this moment, Silas Gray was no longer just the stranger she had wrested from the storm. He had become part of her space, part of the silence she had once called her own, now carrying a rhythm both warm and dangerous in a way she could not yet name. Night fell quicker in winter. Beyond the cabin walls, Montana lay swallowed in black, the stars lost behind heavy snow clouds. Inside Naomi Carter's small home, a single oil lamp burned low on the table, its pale gold ring barely pushing back the shadows, yet softening the space into something close, almost intimate. Naomi sat at the table, debt papers spread before her. The figures weren't much by the measure of wealthy ranchers, but to her they were a burden she could not shake. Since her husband's death, the bank had pressed harder, hinting they only waited for her to fail so they could buy her land cheap. She closed her eyes, fingers tightening on the paper's edge. Whispers from town echoed in her mind. They said she would never hold this place. They said a black widow had no business thinking she could stand against the weight of white neighbors and the harsh frontier both. The door creaked open, letting in a rush of cold. Silas stepped inside, shoulders dusted with snow, his dark coat stiff with ice. He set a bundle of wood by the hearth, brushed off his hands, and turned. His gray eyes fell on the papers, then on her. He saw the strain in her posture at once. "Bank trouble?" His voice was low, steady. Naomi didn't answer right away. She lifted her gaze, her dark eyes meeting his. For a moment she nearly dismissed it, but the steadiness in his look drew words from her throat. "They want this ranch. I don't know how much longer I can hold it." Silas pulled a chair opposite her. The lamp caught half his face, sharp and set, the other half shadowed, lending him an air both solid and unreadable. He didn't rush to comfort, only sat a long moment, as if choosing each word. "Naomi, you've kept this place through winters most men couldn't survive. Don't let them take it. I won't let that happen." She stared at him, caught off guard. The promise was too swift, too certain. A faint laugh escaped her, bitter. You don't understand. They don't need fairness to take from me. Just an excuse. And they have both reason and power. Silas leaned forward, setting his hand on the table, close enough to brush against hers. His voice was slow, the timbre deep and warm, filling the small space. There are things I can't change, but I can fight to keep this land in your hands. I've lost once. I won't let it happen again. Not to you. Naomi's eyes widened. In the depths of her heart, she felt the truth of it. His words were no pleasantry, no empty oath. They came from a man carved by loss, who now saw in her something he could not let slip away. Her hand loosened, fingers brushing the back of his. In the faint light, the small touch shone like the brightest thing in the room. Silas didn't withdraw. Instead, he turned his palm, closing her hand within his own, broad, calloused, yet steady with warmth. Naomi drew a long breath, chest rising and falling slow. Her fingers trembled faintly, but she did not pull away. The heat of his hand seeped through, melting the cold that years of solitude had left inside her. Their eyes held, longer than any time before. No smile, no sweet promise. Only a shared understanding. She no longer stood alone. Outside, the storm still roared. But within the small cabin, the oil lamp cast their joined hands in soft shadow. It was not just a touch. It was a vow, a bond unspoken. The fragile beginning of trust Naomi had believed she would never give again. The future remained uncertain. The bank would write again. The townsfolk would whisper sharper still. Yet tonight, in the quiet warmth of that cabin, Naomi let herself believe in the hand she held, offered in the dark, steady and unyielding. The storm tore through the valley harder than any night before. Wind battered the cabin roof, groaning like the earth itself. The windows rattled, gusts slipping through cracks and making the oil lamp flicker. Yet within the small room, steeped in the scent of pine smoke and resin, another storm was rising, silent, but no less fierce. Naomi sat close by the hearth, the quilt drawn tight around her shoulders. Firelight rippled across her sun-browned face, carving shadows that hid and revealed her in turn. Beside her, Silas sat still, his gray eyes fixed on the flames, though his mind was elsewhere. For days, closeness had become a quiet habit, hands brushing by accident, shoulders pressed when they leaned from the draft, glances that lingered a moment too long. But tonight, something different stirred. Naomi felt it in her breath, uneven, quickened. A log split with a sharp crack, sparks shooting up. Naomi flinched. Silas's hand closed over hers, firm, instinctive. She looked down, seeing his calloused palm wrapped around her smaller one, warm and steady. She should have pulled away, kept the line drawn. She did not. She lifted her gaze and met his eyes. The gray no longer cold, but deep, steady, like still water under night sky. They looked at one another until even the storm outside seemed far off. Only breath remained, first measured, then quickening. Silas leaned closer, unhurried, giving her time to choose. His breath brushed her cheek, warm, salted by life in the storm. Naomi closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them again, finding his face near. At last, the space between them fell away. The kiss came not with haste, but with tremor and hesitation, as if each feared breaking the fragile moment. Lips touched, soft and warm, not in possession but in recognition. Naomi trembled, her hand gripping his arm. Silas drew her near, his arm firm around her shoulders. The fire flared, throwing their joined shadow wide across the wall. Two figures pressed close, the distance erased. The kiss deepened, hesitant at first, then sure. The wind outside howled, but within only the rush of hearts and the mingling of breath remained. Naomi felt every shiver in her body, born not of cold, but of a door opening that had long been shut. Words were needless. Hands spoke instead. Silas touched her face, his fingers brushing her cheek, trailing through her loosened curls. Naomi pressed her hand against his chest, steady beneath her palm, the beat strong and certain. That heartbeat told her, at least tonight, she was no longer alone. As the oil lamp waned, the fire's glow alone lit the room. They let silence guide them, not rushing, only touching, only breath against skin, the trembling of two bodies drawn close. That night, Naomi was no longer only a widow clinging to her late husband's land, and Silas was no longer a stranger hiding secrets in gray eyes. They gave each other what both had thought lost forever: trust, connection, and love. Outside, the blizzard still raged, but inside the cabin, another fire had taken hold. One not fed by pine logs, but by the hearts of two souls who had found each other in the dark. After the storm, dawn returned, though the Montana sky still lay heavy under gray clouds. Snow blanketed the land, its glare harsh and blinding, muffling the world in silence. In the small log house, Naomi woke with a strange unease. The night before, that lingered at salt in her mind. Silas's hand warm around hers, the rush of breath, the trembling kiss. For the first time in years, she had opened her heart, letting love back in like a flame in the bitter winter. Silas was gone early. Naomi moved about the cabin, straightening the table, tidying what was left from supper. In the corner of the kitchen, her eyes caught on something she hadn't noticed before. A leather case, worn yet sturdy, tucked among the few things Silas had carried in that night. She hesitated, but curiosity won. She opened it. Inside lay several papers and a silver pocket watch, polished and gleaming. She lifted it, snapped the lid, and found the engraving within: S. Gray, Barrow Creek Ranch. Naomi froze. Barrow Creek Ranch. She knew that name. One of the largest, wealthiest spreads in the region, spanning hundreds of acres, with dozens of workers and herds. Its owner, Silas Gray, was spoken of often in town, powerful, distant, untouchable. Her hands trembled. She sifted through the case. Land deeds, letters sealed in red wax. There was no doubt now. Silas was no drifter, no ruined wanderer. He was one of the richest, most formidable men in Montana. The sound of the door broke her stillness. Silas stepped in, snow clinging to his shoulders, breath fogging in the cold. He stopped at once when he saw her standing rigid, the silver watch in her hand. Naomi lifted her gaze, her dark eyes sharp with hurt and anger. "Who are you? Really?" Silas closed the door behind him, stood silent for a long moment. The face she had come to read, hardened yet plain, was now unreadable. "Naomi, I meant to tell you, just not yet." A bitter laugh slipped from her lips, rough and breaking. "Not yet? You slept under my roof, ate my food, held my hand in the dark, and only now I find out you're one of the wealthiest men in this territory." Tell me, Silas, what am I supposed to believe? Was it feeling or pity? He stepped forward, hand lifting as if to reach her. Naomi drew back, swatting his touch away. The sharpness of it left his hand suspended, then falling uselessly to his side. I didn't deceive you, he said, voice low, edged with strain. I came here because of the storm, because my horse failed, nothing more. I hid the rest, because I'm tired. Tired of people seeing only the land and the name, never the man. The words bore weight, but to Naomi's ears they sounded late, like excuses carried too long. And me? She asked, eyes glistening. Did you see me? Or only a widow to pity, a warm place to wait out the storm? The silence that followed was thick as ice. Silas bit his lip, gray eyes shadowed with regret. Yet the regret could not mend the crack tearing open inside her. Naomi set the watch down hard on the table, its clang sharp in the small cabin. I don't need pity, and I don't need another man walking into my life with secrets, leaving me nothing but scars. Silas stood still, fists clenched, aching to close the space but unable. The room pressed tight, not from its walls, but from the unseen distance that had risen between them. Naomi turned away, hiding the blur of tears in the dim lamplight. Her heart still carried the warmth of last night, but now it was smothered by betrayal. Outside, the wind still cried, but within the cabin, a different storm had broken, born not of nature, but of truth, and the fracture between a woman long scarred by loss and a man not yet honest with himself. Naomi no longer stepped into the room where Silas once sat by the fire. She avoided his eyes, sidestepped the accidental touches that once made her heart stir. Since the truth had come to light, the cabin that once felt warm now seemed split in two, half lit by fire, half swallowed in shadow. Silas remained, working in silence, clearing snow, mending fences, tending the stable. Yet between them lay a distance no one dared cross. Naomi's heart wrestled itself raw. The memory of the storm, of his breath and his hand in hers, still burned deep, but the wound of his hidden name made forgiveness a thing she could not easily give. Each morning, when she watched him step out into the cold, heavy coat pulled tight, Naomi wanted to call his name, to ask why he chose deception. But when those gray eyes met hers by chance, she turned away, letting silence consume all that remained unsaid. In town, gossip spread quick as fire in dry grass. Folks whispered that Widow Carter had learned her place, nothing more than a pastime for a wealthy man grown restless. Some cut deeper, saying a black woman clinging to land was absurd enough, but tied to a ranch baron? The end was already written. She would lose everything. The bank, waiting like a wolf, pressed harder. A manager arrived at her door, polished boots sinking in snow, his smile polite but eyes sharp. Mrs. Carter, times are difficult. If you'd consider surrendering the ranch, we might ease the terms and see you off without trouble. Naomi stood on the porch, gripping her cloak tight. Behind her, Silas was silent. She knew he heard every word, but he said nothing. That silence cut deeper than the man's words. She no longer knew whose side Silas Gray stood on, hers or the one he was born to. That night, Naomi sat alone by the oil lamp. Shadows quivered on her tired face. She remembered his hand clasping hers, the vow whispered in the dark, that he would not let her lose this place. Once she believed it. Now the words replayed like mockery. If he was truly Barrow Creek's master, what weight did that promise carry? Was it faith, or just the charity of power? Silas appeared in the doorway, tall frame half buried in shadow. He stepped forward, but Naomi straightened, back turned, her posture its own refusal. He paused, hand tightening, then falling away, and left without a word. The next day in town, whispers stung sharper. She'll lose that land soon enough. Maybe Silas Gray's tired of his little game. Naomi heard every word. Her steps stayed firm, her heart heavy, but she would not let them see her falter. When she came home, Silas was stacking wood. He looked up, ready to speak, but Naomi passed without a glance. His hand slackened, a log fell into the snow with a hard crack. In that moment, both knew what had begun between them was broken, not for lack of feeling, but because truth had carved a gulf too wide. On the third night after the storm, Naomi pushed open the Boitin stable door alone, her hands trembling from cold. She meant to check the calves, a task Silas once took. Her boot slipped on ice, body tilting. A hand shot out to steady her. This time Naomi shoved it away, her eyes colder than the snow outside. Silas froze, hand falling, gray eyes shadowed with a sorrow he could not hide. Naomi turned, heart storming. She could not forget the night by the fire, could not erase the warmth that had reached her soul. And because she could not forget, the fracture hurt more. The townsfolk, the bank, they circled like wolves scenting blood, waiting for her to fall. Naomi knew that if this silence stretched on, she would lose more than land. She would lose the last chance to protect what still remained hers. But that night, she sat alone, letting the dark fold around her, while in the next room Silas sat too, staring at a fire dying low. Two flames, two hearts, parted only by thin walls of wood. Between them a fracture cut deep, so deep it might never be mended. That morning, the cabin lay in an unusual stillness. Naomi woke to find the long bench by the hearth empty. No heavy boots sounded on the porch, no hammer striking fence posts, no sharp crack of split wood. Silence swallowed everything. She stepped outside. Snow lay deep, but boot tracks marked a trail leading away from the yard. Her heart thudded, dread rising sharp and sudden. When she turned back in, her eyes caught on the rough-hewn table. Resting square in its center was a thick envelope, pale yellow, sealed with red wax. Naomi's hand trembled as she touched it. She sat, chest pounding, and broke the seal. Silas's handwriting sprawled across the pages, strong strokes, slanted as if carved in haste. Naomi, if you are reading this, I've gone. I did not want to leave, but I feared if I stayed I would bring you more pain. I lied, not from contempt, but because I longed to be seen as a man, not as a name tied to land and wealth, only as a soul caught in a storm, in need of a roof and a fire to live. Her grip tightened until her knuckles whitened. Tears blurred the ink. I was born to the Gray family of Barrow Creek. From boyhood, I was taught land, cattle, and coin were the measure of worth. But in those walls of plenty, I found only loneliness. I walked away, wandered, to recover what was left of myself. When the storm drove me to your door, I thought it was fate testing me once more. But your eyes, your hands pulling me from the snow, that was what saved me, not the fire. Naomi wiped her cheeks, but the tears came harder. Memory rose sharp. Silas's gray gaze from the corner of the room, his hand closing over hers in the dark, his voice unsteady when he swore she would not lose the ranch. I kept the truth because I feared, If you knew me, all would collapse. I feared you'd believe it was pity or some scheme. But Naomi, that night by the fire, it was not pity nor duty. It was love, a love I thought long dead, but you brought it alive again. Her hands shook, the paper rattling. Her chest ached, caught between wound and sweetness. I do not ask your forgiveness, only that you know this. You are the only one who ever saw me, not the ranch, not the name, but the man. Whatever comes after, Naomi, I will always know this truth, that once in my life I was truly loved, and once I gave love with all I had. Naomi bent over the table, sobs breaking free, tears falling hard onto the pages, pain and longing tangled in every breath. In the shadows of memory, she saw him again, watching her as she swept the floor, as she smiled faintly, as she pressed a cool cloth to his brow during fever. Those looks had never been lies. She pressed the letter to her chest, shuddering. Her heart tore between reason and feeling. Silas had deceived her with silence, yet he was the first man to honor her, to see her. The oil lamp flickered, throwing her lone figure against the wall, clutching the letter. Outside, snow kept falling, burying the trail of his boots. But inside, Naomi knew the mark he left would never fade. From the pages, from memory, and deepest of all, from her heart. The snow melted slow, but the pressure from the bank came fast as floodwater. In the weeks after Silas left, Naomi received notice after notice, each red seal on paper cut like a blade across her heart. Town gossip rose louder, saying Widow Carter had finally reached her end. Soon the land would change hands, they said, and her name would remain only as a bitter footnote in saloon chatter. Naomi stepped onto the porch, eyes on the fields buried under ice. This was the land her husband had bled and sweated for. It was the place where she had laughed, wept, and once believed she could not endure alone. Her heart sank heavy. No matter her strength, she knew her time was running short. The day of reckoning came sooner than she thought. A black carriage from the bank rolled up to her gate. The manager, smug, polished boots biting into the snow, stepped down with two aides. He held out papers, his voice dry and final. Today, if payment is not made, we reclaim this property. Naomi stood tall, though her hands shook beneath her cloak. She knew she had no weapon against it. Her lips parted, but another voice cut through. Deep, rough, unyielding. No, you will not take this land. Every head turned. Silas Gray, in a long black coat, dismounted. His face was hard, his gray eyes fierce, no longer veiled. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. The gray name carried weight, enough to make the bankers falter. Naomi's breath caught, pain and shock clashing in her chest. She had not expected him back, least of all like this. Silas strode forward, pulling papers from his coat, slamming them onto the makeshift table. These are proof. You falsified figures, raised interest unlawfully. These signatures are forged. They will not stand in county court. The manager paled, scrambling to respond, but Silas's voice cut clean. I am master of Barrow Creek Ranch. You know I have the power to drag this into the courts. Walk away now, or lose everything. The air froze. Townsfolk gathered, watching a scene none had imagined. The widow, long scorned, now defended openly by one of the most powerful men in Montana. The manager clenched his jaw, then motioned to his aides. Papers were gathered, the carriage turned, and soon the bankers were gone, leaving silence heavy in their wake. Naomi turned to Silas. Her eyes blazed, filled with turmoil, gratitude, and hurt. He had saved her, yet the memory of his lie still clung like frost. Silas drew a breath, reaching inside his coat once more. He set another bundle of papers into her hands. All I own, I sign over to you. This ranch, and the acres of Barrow Creek beside it. Your name is on them now. I did not return to claim, Naomi. The choice is yours. Yours alone. Her hands trembled, eyes widening at her name printed bold on deeds men spent lifetimes to possess. He had truly surrendered it. Why? She asked, her voice breaking. Silas met her eyes, steady. Because you are stronger than any person I have known, and because I love you, I need no land, no power, only for you to believe that nothing between us was ever false. Tears blurred her sight. She looked down at the papers, then up at him, his face stern, yet honest. Memories flooded back, his hand clasping hers in the dark, his vow by the fire, his gaze following her in moments too small for pretense. Around them, the crowd murmured. But Naomi heard none of it. For the first time, her heart knew what it had never known. The choice was hers. Clutching the deeds to her chest, she wept. Silas stood waiting, neither pressing nor pleading, only still, as if the world rested on her answer. Naomi understood then. From this moment on, the ranch, the future, her life, none would be decided by banks, by townsfolk, or by any man's claim. They would be decided by her, a woman strong enough to stand and brave enough to love again. That night, the storm had passed, but in Naomi's chest, the echoes of another tempest remained. The cabin lay quiet, the oil lamp casting a soft gold against the timber walls. On the table, the papers Silas had left still waited, proof that this time he had truly placed every choice in her hands. Naomi sat by the window, her gaze on the white-blanketed fields outside. All her life she had carried whispers, the weight of judgment pressing hard. Yet from the moment Silas appeared, what she thought only she could endure had become a journey shared. He had been there when she trembled in the snow, had clasped her hand in the dark, had sworn she would not lose everything. And still, the truth of who he was pulled her heart apart. Was his love real, or only the passing sympathy of a man grown weary of power and wealth? The soft creak of the door broke her thoughts. Silas stepped inside, his tall frame throwing shadow across the floor. He stopped at the threshold, as if one more step might drive her back. In the dim lamp glow, his face showed weariness, yet also unshaken resolve. Naomi. His voice was low, hoarse, almost fearful of breaking the silence. I will go if that is what you want. But before I do, you must know this. Never, not once, did I see you as shelter or excuse. You are the first to make me feel I was not a name, not an estate, but a man. Naomi turned, her dark eyes glimmering in the light. Tears pressed close, but she held them back. Memories surged, his bowed head by the fire, his promise in the dark, the way his eyes followed her through the room. All of it had been real. Her heart had known it long before her reason gave in. Silas stepped forward once, then stopped. His fist clenched at his side, but he did not close the space. He left it to her. And in that moment, Naomi saw it clearly. Choice was not only the land outside, but the love standing before her. She rose. Slow steps carried her closer. Her heartbeat quickened, not with anger, not with hurt, but with decision. Silas did not move, gray eyes fixed on hers, waiting. When only a breath lay between them, Naomi lifted her hand, trembling yet sure, and set it against his chest. The first thing she felt was heat, the strong, urgent beat beneath his coat. She closed her eyes briefly, letting her palm rest against the life within him. For the first time in years, she reached for warmth rather than waiting for it to be given. "I do not need your land or your power," she whispered, her voice tight yet steady. "I only need to know you are truly here, with me. Not out of pity, not to repay a debt, but because you choose me." Silas laid his hand over hers, bowing his head, his gaze soft with a truth that left her breathless. "Naomi, I chose you the moment you pulled me from the storm." Her tears broke free, but they were not of sorrow. They carried release. The weight she bore, the torment between doubt and hope, lifted at last in one simple act, her hand upon his chest, and his heart beating strong beneath it. Silas drew her closer, not by force but in acceptance. Naomi leaned into him, hearing the steady rhythm of his heart, finding her own joining it. For the first time, she no longer felt alone on this land. Outside, the snow had ceased. A pale moon broke through the clouds, casting silver light across the fields. Within the cabin, two souls once lost and wounded had found themselves in each other. Naomi knew then it was no rescue, no bargain. It was love. Love born of being seen, of being chosen, and of holding fast with both hands. And in that moment she decided she would not only hold the land, she would hold Silas, the man who proved love could bloom even in the harshest winter. Spring returned, the snow melting slow but steady. Dark earth appeared beneath the white crust, green shoots pressing upward like a promise of life. Naomi Carter stood on the porch, gazing across the wide fields, her heart swelling with something unfamiliar yet certain: faith. Since Silas had come back, everything had changed. No more walls of silence, no more nights filled only with the cry of the wind. Instead came the ring of hammer against wood as the fence was mended, the soft laughter when they stacked firewood together, the quiet warmth of a gaze that lingered just long enough to remind her she was seen. Naomi realized she did not need a rescuer. What she needed was a companion. And Silas had proved himself, day after day. One evening, as the last light poured across the valley, Naomi walked into the yard holding something small. Silas was splitting logs, his shirt damp with sweat, his skin red from wind and sun. He looked up, those gray eyes soft as always, the look that made her feel visible, no longer a shadow buried by prejudice. Naomi stopped before him, hiding her hand behind her back. Drawing a steady breath, she brought it forward, a simple gold ring. It was no gleaming jewel, no ornate piece, only a modest circle carved with faint lines, rough and true. Silas froze. He looked from the ring to her face, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "Naomi?" She smiled, her eyes shining though steady. "You gave me the right to choose. Today I choose you, not because you are Silas Gray of Barrow Creek, not because you stood against the bank, but because you are the man I want beside me, in every winter, in every summer to come." She took his hand, calloused and work-worn, and slid the ring onto his finger. Her hand trembled, but her gaze never faltered. "I am proposing to you, Silas, because this love is not rescue. It is two hearts finding each other." Silence fell, only the whisper of wind through tender leaves. Silas stared down at the ring, then up at Naomi. Tears glimmered in his eyes, but his smile was radiant, rare, and true. He clasped her hand, lifted it to his lips, and pressed a kiss to her fingers. "Naomi, no one has ever made me feel chosen. No one has ever asked if I wanted to stay. And now, hearing it from you, I vow I will never let go of this hand." In the fading light, they held each other, their shadows merging on the earth, waking into spring. 6 months later, Montana blazed with summer. Golden fields of barley stretched wide, bordered by rolling green pastures. The Carter farm, now Carter Gray, thrummed with new life. Fresh fences lined the fields, barns stood full, cattle grazed strong and healthy on the hillsides. Their wedding had been simple, without grandeur yet rich in meaning. A handful of townsfolk came, some curious, some whispering, but all witnessed Naomi and Silas stand side by side, vowing themselves to each other. Naomi wore a plain ivory dress, her curls tied back, her face glowing with quiet joy. Silas, in a white shirt, clung to her hand as though his soul might slip away if he let go. There was no grand feast, only bread, apple cider, and the twang of an old banjo. But it was enough, for that was the day Naomi Carter, once scorned as the black widow who could not keep her land, lifted her chin, slid a golden ring onto her husband's hand, and proved to all that their love was real. That evening, when the guests were gone, Naomi and Silas stood on the porch together. Before them stretched the wide meadow, bathed in crimson sunset. Children laughed in the yard, neighbors' little ones, and a few orphans Naomi had begun teaching letters in the old granary. Their voices rang bright, like a promise of tomorrow. Naomi leaned into Silas, their hands entwined. He tilted his head, gray eyes locking with her dark gaze. No words were needed. They both knew every storm, every fracture, every tear had led to this moment. The breeze carried the scent of new grass and apples from the orchard. Silas bent close, whispering in her ear, "We chose each other, and we will keep choosing again and again." Naomi smiled, her eyes wet with joy. She knew love was not a gift fallen from the sky. It was a decision, a courage to stay, to trust, to open one's heart again. On that porch, beneath a burning sky, two souls once lost had found their home. Behind them, the children's laughter echoed like the first song of a new life. And on Silas's hand, the simple gold ring gleamed, not for its worth, but as proof of the love Naomi had placed there with her own hands. Love born of loss, tested in pain, and sealed in choice. Perhaps the most beautiful part of Naomi and Silas's story was not the golden ring, nor the modest wedding after storms. It was how they learned to choose one another, again and again. In life, especially as years turn heavy, we see that love rarely begins with fireworks. It is built from patience, from trust, and from the courage to open one's heart a second time. Naomi, the black widow, once cast aside, offering a ring to Silas, and walking with him through storms, stood as proof that true happiness knows no boundary of skin, station, or past. It needs only two hearts willing to share joy, sorrow, and loss alike. And when we look back on our lives, what we remember most are the moments we were chosen and loved for who we truly are. That is why stories like this touch us so deeply, because they remind us it is never too late to find a home. If this story stirred a memory, a lesson, or a thought of your own, share it below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to continue hearing more heartfelt Wild West love stories. For love, at any age, is always worth cherishing and worth telling.